Hello, everyone. My name is Seth Dellinger. I'm with the Feldenkrais Guild of North America's communication team, and I'm honored today to be speaking with Russell Delman. So this is our monthly Senseability online newsletter, and our topic for this month is deep listening. So Russell and I will be exploring what that is in a moment, but just to introduce Russell, he is a Feldenkrais trainer, going all the way back to 1984. He's in fact directed 10 different Feldenkrais trainings. So training other Feldenkrais practitioners, taught in 50 different trainings around the world. But even before beginning his journey with the Feldenkrais method, he was involved in meditation. Over 50 years, you've been practicing and teaching meditation, and many other disciplines, from being involved with the human potential movement at Esalen, studying Gestalt psychology, yoga, the practice of focusing, if people are familiar with Eugene Gendlin's work. And today, along with his wife, Linda Delman, who's also a Feldenkrais trainer, Russell has created the Embodied Life program. So drawing on a lot of experience. And once again, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Seth.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about the Feldenkrais method. But what we wanted to particularly really focus in on is the way that we use our attention, the way we listen. So that word listening isn't just something we're talking about doing with the ears, although that could be involved. But I wonder if you could just give a little bit of an introduction to the practice of the method, but really with an accent on that question of how we listen to the movement.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so one of the things that stands out to me when people think of the Feldenkrais method, they think of movement, because that's the modality that we work through. And it's really easy, even for Feldenkrais teachers, to think that the work is about movement predominantly, or it's about the body predominantly, because it's so good at working with the body and with movement. But the analogy I like to use is, imagine that you loved Mozart. You thought Mozart brought you to great inner spiritual heights, human heights. You just felt like this is a gift to humanity. And then they found that listening to Mozart was good for depression. And then a few years later, you heard people saying, well, the purpose of Mozart is to heal depression. You would go, wait. I'm really happy that it works so well with depression, but let's not reduce it to that. Right. So I had the same feeling about the Feldenkrais method. I knew Moshe Feldenkrais, and I knew his commitment to the free human being, freeing the human being. And he saw that a free human being has to develop awareness, because without awareness, we have to repeat the past. The brain will do what it already does unless it can awaken to a new possibility. So then he realized that, the modus operandi for changing awareness is to be able to shift your attention. If you maintain the same attention, you will maintain the same thinking pattern, feeling patterns, movement patterns. But if you can shift your attention, you can begin to get new possibilities. So that's the way awareness grows, which leads you toward freedom. So that's a beautiful progression, we could say, that we work with awareness of the body, or we attention to the body, to grow awareness so we can get new choices. Because his main interest was freedom, the possibility of really becoming a human being who's not the victim or trapped in our past learning. So I got interested in that very early. I was I came to Feldenkrais quite young. I was 22, and I was an athlete. Been meditating for 4 years at that point, so I'd already been interested in awareness in a certain way. Was teaching yoga at that point, so I had good bodily movement. And so at first I was confused because the work seemed so simple. The movement aspect was not challenging. But when I realized how stuck in my ways of attending and the way my inner dialogue would comment on things, or oh, wait a second, I am not a free being. I am trapped in a limited number of options. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, what he's really doing is using movement to get us to get more freedom in how we attend to our experience. And that insight changed everything. That's when I realized, oh, this is meditation in another way. This is inner work in another way, and psychological work in another way. So that's when I realized that, oh, to get freedom in the movement of attention, those of us who tend to be more inward, to be able to come outward more easily. Those who tend to get lost in the world, to go in. If you're good at attending to your body, can you also attend to your thoughts and feelings? If you tend to focus on your thoughts, can you shift and not be lost in thought, but come back to your physical sensations? So I began to see this whole realm of living experience being available if we can shift attention, right? And we all have biases of attention, every one of us. You know, I've been working with this for a long time, of course. My wife tends to see detail. I tend to see big pictures. I have learned from her and from Feldenkrais to learn to get really interested in detail. But my natural thing is I'll point out the mountains, she'll point out the flowers. You know?
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. We often, as Feldenkrais teachers, notice patterns in the body. We notice a bias in the movement, but what you're talking about is in our attention or in our even conception of things, that we tend to have a bias in one way or the other. And you talked a couple times, you mentioned shifting the attention, which I imagine easier said than done. So I wonder if you could talk about how does one begin to actually, like, maybe I'm that person who's all, you know, involved in the details. How would I, you know, find a way out of that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's remarkably simple and not easy to change our patterns of attention. Remarkably simple. It's so helpful to have a guide to do that at first. So, example, most Feldenkrais people, or in Feldenkrais classes, we pay attention in the body. Well, it doesn't take a lot right now for you, Seth, or anyone listening to this to feel, okay, can I feel my bottom right now, what I'm sitting on? Yeah. Could I feel my feet on the floor or whatever they're touching? Can I also begin to shift my attention to the space I'm sitting in, the space around me? Could I feel my bottom on this seat and the space around me? Could they live even in the same moment? That's a pretty high level of development. But at first, we do a back and forth. Even with the sitting itself, we could say, well, yeah, I feel my weight, I feel the chair. Okay, can you feel the texture of the surface you're on? So now we move from body to world. That's a very interesting moment. So if I say to you right now, pay more attention to the density of the surface you're on. Is it a pillow? Is it a wood seat? Is it a concrete something? Is it plastic? You would be able to tell something about the world. And now if I say, well, is there more weight on the right side of your bottom or left side of your bottom? Now you're going into your bodily sense. They're both bodily senses, but one is attending to the world and one is attending to yourself. And this becomes one of the key distinctions for human beings. You'll see people very often in relationship with each other, where one is more externally oriented and one more internally oriented. And often the conflicts will develop by where one is putting their attention. Is it on what's happening around them or what's happening within them? And as hopefully whole human beings who are developing our awareness and our capacity for experience, we will grow the ability to have both an external reference and an internal reference. They may not be 50-50, but they will both show up consistently enough that you don't lose touch with the world around you and you don't lose touch with your inner world. That's part of the maturation of human consciousness. Yeah, where someone can be conscious. There are so many people who develop, you see this a lot with meditators, they get really deep in themselves, but their relationships really stink. They don't know how to relate to others. They're awkward. And then you see these very socially developed people who are kind of absent from inner changes that are going on. And one of the key dimensions of attention is, does it go outward? Does it go inward? And does it have the flexibility to go in both directions? And then in my personal definition of awareness, that the outside and the inside begin to form one unified world, so that effortlessly one can sense, I can be in touch with what I want to say and see you and your responses at the same time. And it's not a disconnect from one or the other.
Right. I'm hearing that, like, putting our attention in one location doesn't automatically have to mean withdrawing it from another. Is it something like that?
It's something like that. The attention is such a big domain that occasionally we want to really narrow it to one thing. Of course, that can be very helpful, but it's the flexibility of attention that we can go, like when I'm teaching meditation, can we go from a focused attention to a diffuse attention, an open field to a more narrow field? Can that become a harmonious, rhythmical movement where sometimes it's more one, people who enjoy the symphony are generally pretty good at hearing the whole symphony, then narrowing in on the first violinist and then opening out. And that's part of the richness. Yeah. In the domains where we tend to be well skilled, that movement is natural. And in the domain of self-experiencing, which is maybe the largest domain we can talk about, most of us are not so well developed in that flexibility of attention.
Mm-hmm. So you're reminding me of a few key ideas from Feldenkrais now. Like you talked about, there's that one area where we tend to be really skilled. Say it's that, connoisseur of music who's zooming in and out as they listen to the symphony. And at the same, and there was this, I remember Feldenkrais said something along the lines of, take that thing that you do so well in life and generalize it.
Yeah.
And that sounds great, but again, easier said than done. So, and on the other hand, we have those things that we're good at, and we kind of like to stay in them and
Mm,
cultivate them. So
mm,
when you were talking about the couple with two different kind of
mm.
ways of using attention, I was thinking about that, like, because the more I practice something and get good at it, the more I feel comfortable doing that one thing.
Right.
And also in my experience of the Feldenkrais method, I think something that's unique is often there's an invitation to notice actually what doesn't feel so good. Like we might be aspiring by the end of the process to get to a nicer place, but in those moments of challenge, those moments of difficulty, or
Mm,
just this feels strange, I don't
mm.
know what to do with that. What would deep listening be in that context?
Yeah. Mm. So let me start by giving a more extreme example. Okay, so let's say not only is it something you're learning that's difficult, let's say you're dealing with pain. Let's say you're dealing with something that's really a difficult moment for you. Let's call it a physical pain, although we can apply the same methodology to emotional pain or pain on any level relationship. So, so what tends to happen is most people have a strong bias. Some people, when they have a pain, they go deeply into that pain and they don't sense much of anything else. You know, I can remember people coming to me when I had my full Feldenkrais practice, and they'd have this pain in their neck and they would, it's right there. No, it's just a little bit above there and it's like this. And and you'd ask them, well, what else can you sense in your body? Well, no, it's really, really terrible here. Very difficult to bring the attention elsewhere. And then you'd have other people who, yeah, I got this pain in my neck, but uh, you know, I've got all this work to do. I've got to get out there. I've got all the, where they don't really pay much attention, except that it's very strong. They want to get rid of it, but they don't notice much about it. So one of the keys in a flexible attention is somebody who is very in their pain. Again, whether it's the same example I could use if someone is in a very challenging, angry state and they keep repeating the angry situation to themselves, right? That's one way of being with it. The opposite way is to be, oh, it's not so important to go into not denial about it, right? So that would be the opposite. But what happens if somebody, go back to the neck person, if they can, usually with guidance, begin to sense, okay, I really hear that your neck is hurting a lot. Take for a moment to feel your bottom on the seat also. But it's my neck that, but I know, we'll get to your neck in a minute. Can you feel your right foot on the floor? In this moment, you're interrupting the neurological pattern of sensing that pain. Because for a moment, that's not going to be in the foreground. You begin to grow the space that the pain is in. Maybe even, what color in this room is your favorite? They have to bring their attention out from their neck to the red or the yellow for a moment. So you're beginning to do what I call pattern interruption, where you take the way their attention has gotten fixated and opened it. Yeah. And that is the beginning of it's like opening windows on a stuffy room. Or if you had, if you had this amount of, let's say this was pain, right? Big red bottle. And you pour this into 1,000 gallons, you got the same amount of pain, but it's in a much bigger setting, right? So that's one way of working with somebody who's fixated their attention. Somebody who's gone way out and they're no longer willing to, you know, deal with something in the relationship that their partner wants to focus on, and they want to say, it's not that important, you're making a big deal out of it. You can guess who the man and the woman are in this dynamic usually. You're making a big, it's not so. How can this person begin to be willing to come out of their strategy of dispersing their attention to narrowing? Mm-hmm. Well, one way, from a Feldenkrais point of view, is begin to do it in less challenging moments, like begin to do it with your body. Can you focus more attention on how you're lifting your hand? Can you focus more attention on this one breath? Is the inhale or the exhale longer? So you give them an attention challenge that is not threatening. And then if you want to step that into the relationship, you begin to get them to focus on something that is not so dangerous for their self-image as that situation, but something else. Mm-hmm. So you use the Feldenkrais methodology of going towards something that's not so difficult, something that, but you grow the ability to use the attention in that domain, mm-hmm. and then expand it. Mm-hmm. So that's, do you get what I'm saying? That's how attention, and then you have a way of generalizing. Back to your example before of generalizing from what you do well to other activities. Mm-hmm. Well, the way you pay attention in the domains you do well, apply that, mm-hmm. to other domains. Mm-hmm.
I was also thinking of a couple of sort of specific examples that sometimes come up in the Awareness Through Movement, the group Feldenkrais classes. Just one example is, say we're practicing a movement of turning the head. And it's simple enough, say, turn your head to the right, and people turn their head to the right. And then often a question will come about, well, what are you doing with your eyes? Mm-hmm. And it's another example of often, the first thought is like, well, I don't know what I'm doing with my eyes. And so then you notice, but then sometimes what you're asked to do is make the movement where your eyes go the same direction as your head, and also make the movement where the eyes go opposite the head. And one of these movements is going to feel more harmonious, and one is going to feel more dissonant. And then there's other things that can happen because one is more habitual and one is more non-habitual, and maybe that would be interesting to talk about. But if we just stay with the question of like feeling into harmony, feeling into dissonance, this has been, in my experience, something that's different about Feldenkrais is we're not always saying, let's get to the best thing, as fast as possible. Here's the correct way, follow these guidelines. But it's often like, try this out. Do you like it or not? And there can be the experience of, no, I don't like it. But then it might even be like, well, why don't you like, what is the particular difficulty that you're experiencing? So sometimes we even kind of investigate the discomforts.
Yes.
So I wondered if you wanted to say anything about that.
Well, I think that's a great example, Seth. I think, how do I want to say this? Yeah, for some time, I don't know if this is so true anymore. People always thought that Feldenkrais was about getting more comfortable, and but it includes, in my opinion, when done in the way that would agree with my style, is to get more comfortable in discomfort. Mm-hmm. Is essential for living life. The idea that we should stay in a comfort zone is a really limited life. I had some concern some years ago that because Feldenkrais ideologically encourages people not to push themselves into hurtful or harmful or sometimes interpreted as uncomfortable places, that people were narrowing their experience. But that wasn't what Moshe Feldenkrais was about. He was, he was a tough guy, and he went to all sorts of difficult things. So, and in teaching Israelis, he was not concerned actually that they were going to get too tender with themselves. They were already very robust. But when he brought that teaching to California, there was the danger of people go, oh no, I don't want to go anymore because that's a little bit uncomfortable. No, that's not what he wanted, and that became, I think, a problem for a while in the teachings of the work, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But once we realized that, okay, we don't want people to push themselves into pain and into ways that they ignore themselves. We want them to first learn how to deeply listen to what their sensations are saying, and then begin to find out, oh, this is a acceptable level of discomfort to explore. And I would say that's important at all levels of experience. If you want to keep your relationships always comfortable, you're going to stay in a very narrow range. If you're unwilling to, but that doesn't mean you have to begin with the most challenging thing you have about sex or whatever it is. Right? You ease your way into, how do we learn to work with discomforts? And how, some of us have a very strong pattern, as I said before, of fixating on what's wrong, and we get burrowed into that hole. And some of us have very strong patterns of denial that there's anything wrong. And it's hard for us to orient. So depending on our tendency, we each need to learn how to go into discomfort in ways that can be illuminating, ways that can be expanding of one's humanity.
Right. So you were pointing out that different people often define discomfort differently. Just that example of Moshe coming from Israel to the United States. Right. And so it seems like inherent in this work is a certain questioning of, I don't know if we want to say, of my beliefs, my patterns, but it seems like there's a blurry line between what we think of as comfortable and what we think of as familiar. And it seems like what you're suggesting about becoming more flexible in my attention, that might actually help me, let's say, cross the Rubicon from my way of doing things that I'm so settled into. Because I think at a certain point in the practice, it becomes a little more explicit that we're actually wanting to try things that are a little non-habitual, like the classic thing of interlacing our fingers the other way, and we all feel like that's strange. But if you keep practicing Feldenkrais, you notice, well, I keep being asked to do this, and actually, over time, like I can feel after a decade of this feels strange, but it feels more familiar than it did before. Right. So there's something to a process there.
Yes, absolutely. To intentionally enter less familiar and usually therefore less comfortable patterns is, I would call it a kind of exciting way to live. So, and I think of it in very little terms. I tend to do the dishes in my house, and I'm more of the dishwasher. And I love, usually my right hand is dominant in the washing and my left hand's the holder. Well, get my left hand doing the washing, my right hand holding. I find my right hand, which I'm right-handed, is just as unskilled in being the helper. It loves to be the dominator. It's like at first I thought, well, my left hand doesn't know how to wash so well. It's not, so I'm not as flexible, I'm not as free. And I said, wait a second, my right hand is not such a good support either. It doesn't know how to be in the background. And that actually became an interesting theme for many situations where the dominant one doesn't, not only does the one who's less dominant doesn't know how to take the lead, but the one who's dominant doesn't know how to retreat into the background. It's like the lead singer modulating their voice so that the support singer can come forward, right? So these enter every realm of life. So I love taking little moments, brushing the teeth with the opposite hand, standing on the all these little things that, if you get curious, are not only kind of humorous, but also you're inviting your nervous system to temporarily enter an unfamiliar pattern. And you will, if you're going to really do that I don't like doing it all the time. I have a preferred way of using my cutlery, and I do that most of the time, but almost every meal I'll have at least a few bites with an unusual pattern of using it. And it humors me, and there's a little bit of demand on my brain to create an alternate pattern for those moments. Mm-hmm. And to get comfortable in that kind of play can be very, what I want to say, it creates, I think, a kind of flexibility. Mm-hmm. And I think it invites a kind of lack of rigidity. So I find I have my preferred routes to get to town. And sometimes I'll just take a less efficient route just to see another, this kind of experimenting with experience is profound. And that's really what we're working with, Seth, is how do you grow your experience of being alive so that it's more and more fulfilling, meaningful, and alive. And that we can then bring that into our relationships, which for me, living is about interrelationship, whether it's with other human beings or the earth or animals or this is a kind of a stretch, the eye of awareness with what's happening inside oneself. So we need to break that down a little bit. That might be a little bit difficult. But from my experience, as awareness grows, it becomes helpful to think of ourselves as multiple beings, actually. It's helpful to have ourselves as, yes, I'm Russell and I'm responsible for what Russell does and all like this, but there are many voices inside of Russell, and awareness can know them and actually develop a language that says, there's something in me, there's a part of me, oh, there's a place in there. That awareness can be larger than the momentary experiences one is having. And when that is true, when one really begins to sense the light of awareness coming to the many, many moments of experiencing, a new kind of flexibility comes, because, how to say it more clearly, I am not this body. The eye of awareness is the space in which this body lives. I am not these thoughts. The eye of awareness is the space that the thoughts live. I am not these feelings. The eye of awareness, the Russell being, is the space in which the feelings live. Everything is living. I love being a father, but I am not a father. The father is living within this awareness.
Mm.
The husband is living within this. The Feldenkrais person's living with. So none of those get to define the true I of awareness.
It sounds like what you're saying is the ways we define ourself, and I mean, with a big nod to the psychological terminology of the self, that can also be a narrowing of the attention.
Yes, and that's and I know this is I'm getting a little expanded for our interview, but this is where it gets really this is where we border into what's normally called spirituality or normally called awakening experience or something like that. But this is where the awareness moves us, in my view. And this is how we become less solidified, still boundaried, still I know I'm here and you're there, but more permeable to life, less less addicted to my self-identities,
Right.
and therefore less prone to violence in self-defense when it's not necessary. We want to be able to defend ourselves in actual threat, but most human beings are you threaten my self-image and I will try to hurt you. You call my country that or my religion that, and I have a right to hurt you. And so we're looking at the direction of consciousness moving to where, oh, in awareness, I see myself connected to everything and everyone. I am not separate from this planet. Well, how am I going to treat it if I'm not separate? If I'm not separate from you? And again, just to be clear, I'm not getting rid of the boundaried self that I know I'm here and you're there and the room is there, but to feel interconnectivity as interrelationship as the ground of our being, we start treating each other differently.
Right.
That for me is the further direction of the work we're doing.
Well, that resonates with me personally. And what I find so interesting is just imagining people listening. If some of that did sound far out for someone, I would just say, even listening to that possibility, did it change your attention? I felt just listening to you that, and imagination is actually another key strategy that's used in the Feldenkrais method. I wanted to just keep following this chain a little bit to ask you something about putting this work into the context of today, because I think both this question of spirituality that you brought up, which isn't necessarily associated with the Feldenkrais method, but I think we could say there's room that it could be. I've heard there's a person who's been involved in the Feldenkrais method for many years, who you may know, named Matthew Zeppelin, who did a sort of, he wrote something on the history of somatics, and of course Feldenkrais is under the, and it's under the umbrella of somatics, we could say. And one of the things he pointed out is, for people who kind of had a super scientific view of the world, like, if we can't measure it, it's not real, that somatic practices like the Feldenkrais method might open them up to the idea that there are things that I can't see that might actually, be involved in. And I would say that's kind of my experience, because I came up in a pretty much an atheist household. And I won't try to define my spirituality here. But also, we could say in the world right now, this question of attention, like things are moving so fast, and like the notifications on people's phones, and at the same time, what you were just speaking about, how we get so defensive that we can even feel like a violent reaction to someone's words. This all seems like it's kind of a lot of the landscape that we're in right now. So just coming back to this theme that you've been been bringing up about how this movement work and this attentional work can actually have this broader impact in our lives. I just wanted to kind of ask you to keep talking about what we've been talking about, but sort of situate it in the world that we're in today, and just to see what your thoughts would be.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yes, so as things are getting faster and faster with each, each technological change brings a gift and a curse for humanity, we could say, right? I mean, the big conversations about AI right now are really a beautiful instancing of this, but all along the way, I mean, if you go back 150 years, you only either walked or rode a horse. That's a huge change. We can't even imagine living like that, right? I mean, it was the rare person who went 50 miles from their home. I mean, each change, I'm happy that I have a car, but it really changes my relationship to life, to time, to space, to everything. And what tends to happen is the machine tends to dominate the human being. So I can get addicted to my cell phone if I'm not careful. It wants my attention. And if I don't take responsibility for my attention, I will get hijacked. And the majority of people I'm meeting are hijacked in certain domains, certain ways. And that's a big part of the loss of potential freedom in the human being. And yet each of these things is a potential ally for freedom. So it goes in both directions, right?
Right.
AI has the potential to free people from work. Now, will that be a freedom ultimately? We'll have to see how people take responsibility for their own brains and whether they just want to now fill it up with more mechanical somethings. Do we lose the sense of beauty? Do we lose the sense of, just taking a walk with a loved one and noticing what's around? So what I'm really interested in this subject that you're bringing so nicely, Seth, is how can we take responsibility for our states, for the states of our nervous system? And to me, that means how do we take responsibility for our attention? Because people are getting, look, it's almost a joke in our culture, the way two people will be sitting in a restaurant looking at their phones and not talking to each other, right?
Yeah.
And how our kids, how their brains are being hijacked at such a young age with no defenses and no developed capacity for differentiating really clearly the artificial world from the world in front of them. Well, what gets lost is, or do I want to say it that way? Let's say the means back is through this physical body and reconnecting to our embodied experience, which is not only in the body. Now, this is really important for Feldenkrais teachers to emphasize, because I think it gets lost, is you can't find yourself in yourself. You can find yourself in relationship. Your relationship to your body is one relationship. Awareness is relationship to the body. Relationship to other people, relationship to your environment. But if we emphasize too much the inner and we lose connection, as this is where we started with the environment, we are incomplete. We are not going to be aware beings. So many people right now are getting lost in their higher levels of their cortex. They're getting lost in thought. and losing connection first to their bodies and then to their rich experience of environment, which is a bodily experience, but just expanded out into the world. And so they live in, and now thinking is great. I'm not an anti-thing. I love to think. We're thinking right now, right? I love thought. I love when it's used effectively for enhancing human experience. But if we're not conscious and really cautious also, it flips. And the gifts we've been given become a Faustian bargain. We give up the soul for the machine. And this is a real danger. And I get so concerned about the little ones right now.
Yeah.
Where I really wonder what their brains will be like, in 15 years, and they'll probably be really smart in certain ways. But the price that's paid for that kind of smart is tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and like you were saying, with people, getting connected to their bodily experience and somehow opening towards something spiritual. Well, even before that, very often people who are head dominant, thought dominant, the best way to help them connect to their feelings is to connect to their body, because they're less resistant to noticing their body than their sadness. So if you get a real thinking person who's disconnected from feelings, I used to say I would have couples come in, and usually the woman was, I'll probably get in trouble for saying it because you're not supposed to say these biases, but I have a lot of evidence. Usually the woman would be more in touch with their feelings, the man more in touch with his thought process. And that would be a source of difficulty between them. And with the man, or who is ever, let's say, masculine dominant, because it's not only binary, let's say masculine dominant person in the relationship, masculine as an archetype, not as a man, right, as an archetype. The masculine dominant is more thought dominant. When they get into their body, they get closer to their feelings. The person who is more the feminine dominant in the archetype, more in touch with the feelings, when they get in touch with their body, they get more grounded and less hijacked by the emotional state. So the body becomes the doorway to the balancing of the human being when it's done in certain ways, I think. And so it's not only towards the realm of spirituality, but it's also toward wholeness in oneself that these work really well.
Just listening to you describe the couple and the sense of grounding, that phrase "common ground" came to mind.
Like, common ground.
Some kind of common ground. Well, it's been
true.
such a pleasure talking with you, Russell. Really enjoyed it. Just thinking over what we've discussed in the last half hour or so, any kind of just final thoughts on deep listening and the Feldenkrais method for people who are listening, including people who might be, less familiar with Feldenkrais.
Right. So I'd say so deep listening is essential for every aspect of meaningfulness in life. Whether it's to the symphony, whether it's to nature, whether it's to your child or to your parent or to the person in the store, when you can feel deep listening is not a question of, it's a question of presence, that I'm here with you in this moment. I'm not 3/4 of me thinking about the next thing or what just happened, but this relationship has predominance. When I go through the line in the store, I want a human connection to the person checking me out most of the time. And it could be just a look in the eye when I say human connection, or can I help you bag that, or whatever it is. But that we are sharing our humanity. So for me, deep listening is a way of living. And for Feldenkrais teachers, you already know well how to listen in your body when you're touching another, or when you're leading a class, how to listen to what's going on in that domain. I encourage you to consciously say, how can this expand into every realm of my life? Mm-hmm. For those who don't know much about Feldenkrais, your bodily awareness can be a doorway, an opening to levels you can't even imagine right now.
That seems like a great place to end. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Seth. It's really a joy. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Take care.